Well, welcome to another edition of Christian Answers. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we're going to be talking more about this insanity of gender confusion and gender disorganization, gender chaos, you might say. And this example, what we want to talk about today is the sports area where you have someone who is competing as a female, but who really is a male. And so you obviously make the whole competition out of balance because you have a man and a woman, or rather a boy and a girl competing against each other instead of boys with boys and girls with girls. And it doesn't help just because somebody in the athletic competition identifies as a female when in fact biologically actually they are male, and that's what the case is today. So we're going to look at a video clip from a commentator named Matt Walsh, who produces content for the Daily Wire that's affiliated with Ben Shapiro and others who come from a more traditional conservative and I believe more balanced perspective than what you're going to hear on the mainstream media like CNN, MSNBC, ABC, and so forth. You're not going to hear this common sense, rational discussion. You're going to hear more of an emotionalistic, ideologically driven, politicized view that is always in harmony with the LGBT movement, that's always in harmony with the far left progressivist movement, and you're going to get a distortion if you listen just to the mainstream media. So what I want to try to do is encourage my viewers to tune in to some of the really good voices out there that really bring a perspective on these issues, because we are being hit with so many different weird, odd, just strange issues coming up all the time. This one, for example, is not new, but it's always different, and it's always in a different form. We have had men who have identified as women who compete against other women and do very well. Obviously, of course, you would imagine that when you have, in effect, a man competing against a woman, it's not going to be fair. And so we talked about before, I think it was last year, we talked about a wrestler, I think his name was Gavin Grimm, who identified as the opposite sex, was put in a situation where he was competing now against the opposite sex, biologically opposite sex, and of course he did very well, or she did very well, or however you want to label him, did very well. But see, again, it's not fair for the girls. It's not fair for the women athletes. Unless we're prepared to do away with all women's athletes and just have one competition for both sexes and just say, this is getting so complicated, this is getting so confusing that people don't know what to classify people in. So we're just going to lump everybody together. There will not be men and women's divisions in the Olympics. It'll just be one big Olympic, for example, marathon run, or one big Olympic swimming event, or one big Olympic javelin toss, or one big Olympic hammer throw, or whatever the athletic event you want to include. You just name it, it'll be one event. That is where we are headed because of the gender confusion in our society. It's a prime example of how a moral, spiritual disease that is hitting our nation is actually throwing off all of society. It's trickling down into every nook and cranny of society. And we are going to get to the point where if this isn't stopped, we will have one Olympic event for both sexes, and which will effectively eliminate all women's sports. Because let's be honest, if you look at it statistically, if you look at it scientifically, men have a better opportunity to beat women in sports in almost every classification. And so you're going to basically eliminate women's sports if we keep going on this route. Well, let's watch Matt Walsh talk more about this insanity, and then I'll come back at the end and talk a little bit more. Let's roll a clip.
This is not the first time we've seen a story like this, far from it. But reading now from the Daily Wire report a few days ago, it says on Monday, when Connecticut had its state open track and field championships at Willowbrook Park, one person broke the state open records for girls in both the 100 and 200 meter runs. That person was, you guessed it, twist ending, a biological boy. Terry Miller, a transgender, won the events. In the 100-meter dash, the runner-up was Andrea Yearwood, who's also a boy. Yearwood won the Class M sprint titles last year, so you may remember hearing about this guy last year. And Miller competed. Now listen. So Yearwood was competing against the girls last year. Miller, who broke the record, he competed on the boys' team during the winter indoor season and then joined the girls for outdoor. So he was a boy 3 months ago. He was a boy just a few months ago. He was a boy, and now he decided that he's a girl. What happened that caused this revelation where he suddenly realized, oh, you know what? Yeah, I think I'm a girl. You know, I think that's actually what's happening here. I'm a girl. Yeah, okay. What happened that caused this revelation on his part? Well, I think I might have an answer to that, but we'll get to it in a second. So, Carissa Niehoff, who's the CIAC executive, she was asked about, what about all the girls who were deprived of a chance to compete because they were knocked out by these two boys? And Carissa says, we do feel for them. We fully agree it doesn't feel good. The optic isn't good. But we really do have to look at the bigger issues that speak to civil rights and the fact that this is high school sports. Hill House coach Gary Moore said that the situation wasn't fair to the girls, although he thinks that Miller, the boy, should have been able to compete. So this is the kind of moral courage that we're dealing with here. Is he says, yeah, it's not fair to the girls, but yeah, I mean, of course the boys should be able to compete. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm just pointing out that it's not. I mean, don't get mad at me. Don't hit me. Please don't hit me. Don't hit me. No. Yes, it's okay. This is okay. I'm just saying that maybe it's a little bit unfair. I don't know. Don't yell at me. Okay, fine. It's fair. It's actually fair. Never mind. Forget I said anything. And then it goes on from there with some quoting some other people as well. Now, this guy, by the way, Miller, he won the 100 meter, and he set a record with a time of 11:72, which is a good time for girls, but he's not a girl. Just for comparison's sake, and so that you understand, in the state outdoor track and field championships for boys, his 11:72 would not have even placed. Okay, so if you're wondering why this guy Miller decided after competing against the boys in the indoor competition, why he decided that all of a sudden he's a girl now, well, I think this might have something to do with it. He broke a record against the girls. If he'd raced against the men, he would have come in 20th place. So it's first place record breaker on one hand, or 20th place non-qualifying on the other. He chose the latter. I wonder why. Now, this is obviously madness. I mean, this is total madness. And to think that we treat the use of steroids as some kind of unforgivable sin in sports, yet we allow men with their testosterone and their muscular, and their advantages with their muscular structure, skeletal structure, and so on, we allow them to compete against girls. I mean, it's just crazy. It's unfair to have people using steroids and competing, but that is quite a bit more fair than to have boys competing against girls. At least if you're a girl competing against another girl on steroids, I mean, you could use steroids too, I guess. So that possibility is open to you, although I don't recommend it. But if you're competing against boys, there's nothing you can do. You can't even cheat to beat him. It's just, he's going to beat you. There's nothing you can do. Especially when it comes to something like track and field, when it comes to something like racing, because there's nothing else involved in racing other than just who's stronger and faster. That's all that matters. There's no extra bit of athleticism. And by the way, I ran track in high school, so I say this with all due respect to track and field. This is one of the things I liked about track and field, is that it's what I liked about running. What I still like about running is that it's just so kind of direct. It's a very kind of raw and direct sport where can I get there faster than you? That's all. So if you're a girl competing against a boy, you've got no chance. He's coming with physical equipment that you just don't have. And so it's wrong and it's unfair. But here's the thing. I can't really explain why biological boys shouldn't compete against girls. I can't really explain why it's wrong to steal these championships from girls who have been working so hard for them. I can't really explain it. If it's not self-evident to you, then there's not much I can do or say. See, the left with this gender identity nonsense, the left has come up with a position that is so wrong and so irrational that in a weird way, it's impenetrable. It is a bulletproof argument because it's so wrong and so crazy that there's nothing you can say to it. It's a position that can't be defeated because it's already detached from reality. And so any argument that you make is going to be based in reality. So you're making arguments that are grounded in reality, and they're floating out there in the ether in fantasy world. Well, what are you going to do? So I can make my point that biological boys shouldn't race against girls. And then you can say, well, why not? And I can say, because they're boys. That's why. And if that's not enough for you, well, I got nothing else. That's it. You shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that because they're boy. That's a boy. That's a girl. They shouldn't race against each other. Is that not clear enough for you? Do you need more than that? That is the end of the argument. Because that's the whole reason. And if you won't accept that, then there's nothing more to be said. You see, traditionally, there's a reason. You may be wondering why arguments and debates in our society are so fruitless and nobody ever wins an argument, no debate ever goes anywhere. And it's because I think we've lost sight of the point of an argument and the point of a debate. And there are people who say, well, you can never win an argument. Arguments can never be won. Well, they can be won. The problem arises when one of the people involved in the argument won't acknowledge the fact that the argument has been won. So traditionally, you win an argument by forcing your opponent to either abandon his position or by backing him into a corner where he has to defend some kind of irrational, indefensible proposition in order to maintain his position. That's another way to win an argument. And once that happens in the argument is over. You won. Even if it continues, you've still won. It's over. So let's walk through the process. When I say boys shouldn't race against girls, and you say, yes, they should. And I say, no, they shouldn't, because boys are biologically different from girls. And you say either, no, they aren't different, or the differences don't matter. Well, at that point, I've won. With your last statement there, you have just said something irrational and indefensible and wrong. And so I've won. Checkmate in 2 moves. That's all. That's the end. There's nothing more that can be said. You just claimed either that boys and girls are the same, or that their differences aren't relevant to something like track and field. And either of those positions are completely lacking in anything resembling reason, coherence, logic, or scientific accuracy. And so therefore the argument is over. Now, I'm emphasizing this point for a reason, because it's important for us to understand that, that there is no way for us to win the argument after it's already been won. And the people who've been defeated just simply refuse to acknowledge that they've been defeated. Because at that point, it's not really an argument anymore. And when it comes to something like transgenderism, particularly the issue of should boys be allowed in the girls' restroom, should boys be allowed to race against girls, and so on, the people who believe in this stuff, they believe in it based on a religious faith. It is a superstition for them. They have not reasoned their way to this position. So you can't reason them out of it either. They haven't looked at the physical evidence and said to themselves, well, yes, I mean, logically, clearly, a boy is just like a girl, and there's no difference, and so they should race against each other. You know, that's not the process that's happened. They have just accepted this as a matter of faith, as a matter of ideology. You know, it might also be kind of an ideological expediency, because they realize that by supporting this transgender stuff, ideologically it benefits them in some way. But either way, this is not logical for them. And so for those of us who oppose this and who recognize that it's just wrong and baseless, well, the main thing we can do and should do is simply put our foot down and resist it. Give it no room. Cede nothing to it at all. That's what we need to do. We've already won the argument. It's an easy argument to win. It's just scientifically, these are different types of people. Boy, girl, they're not the same. Okay? That's it. Argument is won. Right there. I have won it. So that part of the program is over. The argument part is over. It's won. Okay. They still won't accept it because they have this is a religious faith, a superstition for them. Okay, so now our next move is just whatever they try to do next, resist it. Oppose it, do not allow it, period. That's what we have to do. What does that mean in the case of boys racing against girls? It means that the parents of the girls who are the victims here, the parents need to band together, not to make arguments, not to sign petitions, they need to band together and refuse to participate in this kind of thing. They need to say, no, this isn't going to happen. We will not accept this. We're going to pull our daughters out of track, out of the meets until this boy is kicked out. So you know what? You want to have a boy race? We're going to pull our girls out. Let him run around the track by himself. Okay, let him do that. Let this track meet just devolve into total incoherence because we are not going to participate. Why isn't that happening? That's what I always think in these situations. Where are the parents? What are you doing? Why are you having your daughter participate in this theater? Why are you having her humiliate herself by racing against this boy that she clearly cannot beat through no fault of her own? And so now she has to go through the humiliation of losing to someone who's cheating. These boys are openly cheating. You know, it would be like if you're racing in your daughters are lining up for a race, and then a girl rolls up on a motorcycle, and the people in charge of the race say, "Yeah, well, we're going to let her have a motorcycle. No one else can have one, but she can have one." Well, would you tell your daughter to go ahead and race anyway? Of course not. That's not even a race anymore. I don't know what this is, but it's not. No, I'm not going to participate in this. That's what every parent should say. Every parent should absolutely refuse to have their daughters enrolled in these sports so long as this charade is going on. And if that were to happen, then the schools would be forced to make a choice. They'd have to choose between effectively abolishing girls' sports or kicking the boys out. That's the choice they can make. The parents, the choice that the parents are giving the school is give us back our girls' sports with just girls, or we will not enroll our girls in this monstrosity that you have created. This, I don't even know, you can't even call it girls' sports anymore. This theater, this charade, we're not going to enroll our girls in that. And so we will blame you, rightly so, for depriving us of girls' sports. So you can appease the one or two confused boys in the school. And honestly, I'm not even sure that they are confused. I think especially this guy who raced against the boys a couple months ago and is now a girl, I simply don't believe that he's even confused about who he is. I don't believe it. I think he's just plain old cheating. And we need to be able to call it what it is, because that's what a lot of this stuff is. Now, I fully believe that there's a certain number of so-called transgenders who are legitimately mentally ill, which isn't to say that they're legitimately, the transgenderism itself is not a legitimate phenomenon scientifically or medically, but they obviously have some issues. And so we should be compassionate to them. And I have a lot of pity for them and I pray for them. But we still should not cede to their demands, and we should not participate in their delusions or enforce them. That's the worst thing we could do for them. But that's one category. Okay, I think these days especially, you also have another category of people who are, quote, transgender, especially when it comes to these boys that are competing against girls, where I don't believe that they're even confused. I think that they're just cheating. They're just pretending, plain and simple. And so for them, I have quite a bit less pity. So anyway, the schools can choose between appeasing these confused boys and these cheating boys. They can appease them and thus alienate every girl and every parent in the school, or they can do the opposite. That's the choice that the schools have to be given. Like, who are you going to alienate? These one or two boys who want to cheat, or are you going to alienate every girl in the school? And actually, it's not even alienating. To tell a boy that he can't compete against girls, you're not alienating him. To be alienated is to be excluded from some group that you ought to be a part of. That's what it means to be alienated. To be alienated is to be deprived of something, of your rightful place in a, somewhere. So boys who are told that they can't compete against girls, or who are told they can't go in the girls' restroom, what have you, they are not being alienated. They're being the opposite of alienated. They're being told, no, we're going to include you where you belong, which is with the boys. It's the girls who are being alienated when you allow boys to compete against them, because they are being deprived of having that exclusive girls' competition, which is what they should have. So they're the ones being alienated. The only way that this stuff, this gender identity, transgenderism, all this stuff, the only way that this stuff has been able to proliferate is because people who know better, people who are rational, people who are in the majority, have been silent and compliant and obedient and have just let it happen. And so we've got to stop letting it happen. And I just think this issue with the sports is a perfect example. These parents, all you need to have is a little bit of courage, just a little bit, just a little tiny thimbleful of courage. That's all we need in our society right now. There are a lot of lies that we all know are lies, and yet have been able to grab hold of our culture because most of us, we don't possess even the smallest little smidgen of courage to stand up and say anything about it. That's really the great crisis in American society, is cowardice. We're just a nation of absolute cowards who will just won't say anything. We refuse to make any kind of stand whatsoever. If we all had just the smallest, tiniest little bit of courage, then things would change overnight. And that's all that's required. To stand up against this transgenderism stuff, it just, especially in this context of sports and so on, it just requires the smallest amount of courage. Because with everybody, if you stand up and say something, almost everybody is going to agree with you. Now, they may agree silently in their heads because they're cowards, but they will agree with you. You're only going to have to deal with a backlash from a small smattering of LGBT extremists. And who cares what they say? Who cares what they think? Who cares? So, a little bit of courage is all that's needed in these times. Let's try that on for size and see what a difference it makes. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening. Godspeed.
Well, as you can see, that Matt Walsh gave a very good commentary on this whole situation. And this is something that we are going to see more and more as the millennials mature into adulthood and as the brainwashing that they underwent in public schools increases because of pressure from the LGBT lobby. We are going to see more of this confusion. Now, how do we defeat it? Well, Matt Walsh basically said the way that we can defeat this, and it's really the only way that it can be defeated is parents just say, no, we will not allow boys into a women's event. We will not allow boys to go into a girls' event. If they go into a boys-girls event, we will withdraw our girls from the event. There will be no event. And so you just have boys under the guise of women running around a circle, and there'll be maybe 2 people in the stands, maybe the mother and the father of the athletes, and that's about it, because nobody wants to see boys competing with girls in a track and field meet, because the results are totally predictable. And that isn't to say anything against women, that's just to say in general, boys are different from girls, and girls are different from boys. And so that's the whole point of women's athletics. You want the girls to be able to compete on an equal playing field with girls, and you want the boys in their own category competing against boys, because boys are different from girls and girls are different from boys. And this is so common sense that we never, ever had to worry about this before until now. So we need to really pray about this. We need to ask God to bring sanity to our culture again, and bring people back to God, back to the Bible, and back to the truth. Well, I hope that's helped. We'll see you back next week on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.